Hello, Trailblazers, and welcome to another edition of Entrepreneur Journey. And today I'm very pleased to have Danny Ozment on the program, and he is a business strategy and podcast consultant. How are you today, Danny?
I'm good, Doug. How are you? How's it going? We're here recording like the week before Christmas. So, are you still busy?
Uh, yes, much to my wife's chagrin a little bit.
Yeah, I know.
Uh, she's like, why are you scheduling anything on the week of Christmas?
Yeah,
But yeah, that's it's people just want to. Other people are wanting. I'm not like soliciting the meetings. Other people are
yeah.
booking, and I left the calendar open, so I didn't
That's a
know
good
whether
thing.
anybody would book or not. So,
Yeah, that's a
um,
good thing.
yeah, it is. So, tell us a little bit about you and your business.
My business is called Emerald City Productions. I also do some educational stuff under my own name, but we specialize in helping people launch and grow their podcasts. I got into this through music. Actually, I was, running recording studios. My backstory, I actually have a master's degree in conducting. I was a classical musician. I was working for nonprofit arts organizations in DC. And when my first child was born, there were some medical issues and we needed some flexibility. So it fell to me to actually create the flexibility by doing something I could do from home. And I knew a little bit about recording through music. And so I started working with groups that I knew, recording them. And as I went into it, I had frustrations with the music business. There were some things I didn't like in terms of how how long projects lasted, how poor musicians and creatives are at budgeting sometimes and paying on time. So I started to look at like what are some other things that I could do, and I was really enjoying podcasts. I listened to a lot of podcasts, but I noticed that some people just really didn't have good sound quality. So at first I was like, "Oh, let me just reach out to these people and see if I can help them." And I emailed a few people and they were like, "Oh yeah, please. I just do this myself. I would love your advice. Tell me what mics to use. Hey, could you edit my show for me?" And I started doing it on the side like that. And then it was sort of a gig. And then people started asking me, "Hey, could you write the show notes? Could you help us with social media strategy? Could you build websites for us?" And I started to learn all these parts, and the business grew, and I added a team. And now we're, a team of 10 people helping 30 plus clients every week get their podcast out, and 6 or 7 launch clients right now launching new podcasts in the new year. So that's really what we do is help people, busy professionals, people who we have brick and mortar, we have online businesses, we have lawyers, we have accountants, we have coaches, consultants, you name it, figure out how to use podcasting to their benefit, whether it's generating leads or building relationship with clients or better customer experience, whatever. That's what we do.
Wow. Well, I think most of our audience are online entrepreneurs. So I think even what you do caters, you said coaches and consultants. So I think what you do caters directly into a lot of things that they do. So I have a few getting to know you questions.
Sure.
So since you're a podcaster, what is your favorite podcast?
My favorite podcast right now is a podcast called Pantsuit Politics. It is a political current events podcast, but it is done by 2 moms who are both former lawyers. One worked in a big corporate firm in Cincinnati. One was a lawyer on the Hill. They tend to be like right on the other side of the aisle from each other, more center than anything. So they really try to use their podcast to get into the issues of the day and hit all of the angles and have really nuanced conversations around those things, as well as educating people. So, like last week they did an episode about the Federal Reserve, 5 things you need to know about the Federal Reserve to understand things that are going on with the economy right now and decisions people may be hearing about. So that's my favorite one. Because, with our clients, I do hear a lot of online entrepreneurial podcasts. I do listen to a lot of coaches and leadership and all that type of stuff. And so I get like all my marketing advice and everything through a lot of our clients just listening to their podcasts. So when I listen on my own, it's things like that, the politics podcast, or I'm from DC, so I listen to a DC sports talk podcast just to stay connected now that we're down here in Orlando, Florida.
Nice. So you haven't picked up any Florida sports teams?
Not really. It's one of those weird things. Like, I grew up as a Washington football team fan since I was 5 years old, and then the Nationals came there while we were living there, and then the Caps won the Stanley Cup while we were living there. So it's kind of hard to, I'm an hour or so from Tampa Bay, so it would be nice to jump on all those bandwagons there, but it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't know that I can do that. I gotta stick with my team.
Way to stay loyal.
Exactly. And believe me, the last 30 years of being a Washington football team fan have not been pleasant. So
I cannot say the same. I grew up in Florida and I was a Florida State Seminoles fan. But then they had all the chaos of Jameis Winston.
Sure. Yeah.
And we had lived in South Carolina at the time, and Clemson, or we still live in South Carolina, and Clemson, of course, was starting to get a lot of traction. And I jumped on that bandwagon, and I'm still on the Clemson bandwagon. So yeah. One rough year is not a reason to leave. Yeah, right. But the culture completely changed in Florida State, so that's was something different. So fill in the blank. If you're not podcasting, you will find me blank. Riding my bike. I like cycling. So I'll either be out riding or watching some race, or like right now, this time of year, it's the cyclocross season in Europe. So it's every Saturday, Sunday morning, there's a fun race where it's similar to mountain biking, but that's probably where I would be, that or reading. Nice. So the terrain is really flat there. You can go really fast on your bike there. If you put me on hills, like if I were to go out the Greenville area in South Carolina, I would be in trouble going up into the foothills there. I'm not a cyclist myself, but I have many friends that are. So okay. I know the struggle. Last question on the personal note. If your house was on fire and you knew all your family was safe and you could save only one personal possession, what would that personal possession be? I think it would have to be photo albums. I'm one of those people that doesn't have a lot of clutter. I don't hang on to things and have a lot of useless crap because my parents were that way, and the last 10 to 15 years has been urging my mother to get rid of the stuff that she's held on to for 50, 60 years, like boxes of National Geographics and things like that, getting her to donate things. So I don't have a lot of that stuff where I'm like, if this bit of equipment got melted, I could buy a new one. If this thing, if this got destroyed, oh well. But I think the photo albums, the things from history of my family and me growing up, I think I'd have to grab that stuff. Yeah, a lot of this younger generation is missing out on the photo albums. Well, yeah, but they also have cloud storage, so if their house burnt down, they wouldn't have to worry about the photos. That's true, but there's something to be said. I like physical books myself. I like picking up a physical book and reading it, and it's kind of like the same thing with a photo album. Like just thumbing through the pages is just kind of cool. Yeah, definitely. So now let's talk about your journey as an entrepreneur. You've already given us a little bit of insight into that, but what inspired you? What was kind of like the spark that got you started? Well, like I said, it was kind of, I'm one of those entrepreneurs that, and I've read the E-Myth Revisited many times. And so I'm kind of one of those people where I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur. I had to start a business because one of us, my wife or I, needed to work from home.
And at that point, 2008, 2009, we weren't where we are now. We're like, now there'd be so many options if I wanted to work remotely. I could do many things, especially with my experience. But back then there wasn't. It's weird to say back then because it's only 14 years ago now, close to 14 years ago. So it was this emergency of, oh crap, one of us has to be home. What do we do? What do I know that I can turn into a business? And luckily at that point, when I was in school, when I was in college, I was, I played the drums and I also was a singer and I got a degree in conducting. And for fun, I'd been, I don't know if you're familiar with a cappella groups, like college a cappella groups, so the movies, Pitch Perfect movies, things like that.
Boys to Men.
Yeah, I was in those types of groups and I'd always stayed up with it. I'd done some groups for fun after college. And I'd started to notice that there were a few people that were making their living recording these groups, like specializing in it. Because, when I was in a group, we did it ourselves. So I have that experience of figuring out something myself and being frustrated and be like, how do I get it to sound amazing like this group or this? And I never knew that there were these geniuses that were recording engineers that were like, oh, I know how to do this. We have this system and we do this and we double these voices and like all that sort of stuff. So that's what I did. It was like, oh, I could figure that out. And luckily I had some mentors that were really open to sharing the information and not secretive about, they had a really, blue ocean, abundance mindset, and it helped me get into it. So honestly, that's what inspired me, was just, I had to figure it out or we were going to have problems. And luckily my wife had a job with benefits and, because at the time I was working for nonprofits that didn't have benefits and things like that. And was overworked and understaffed and all that sort of stuff. So being home and starting my own business really quickly went from, oh crap, I have to do this, to, oh wow, this allows a lot of flexibility. Oh wow, we can do this. Oh yeah, I can take my kid to that appointment, or we can go on vacation now because I don't have these concerts at this time of year, or that type of thing.
Yeah, that rolls right into my next question. So what is the most rewarding part of being an entrepreneur for you?
Well, I hinted at flexibility, but even for me, besides the flexibility, and I guess this relates to flexibility, it's there is no end in sight. There is no, there are no barriers in a way. If I want to shift, if I want to pivot, if I want to come up with something new, if I want to go in a different direction, if I want to eliminate part of the business, if I want to fire a client, I can do that. I think because, I'm an Enneagram 3 wing 4, type A, whatever you want to call it. Like I like to be in control of certain things. And so having bosses, it was always one of those things where I was like, man, this person, they're really good at this, but they have a blind spot here. And if they would just listen to me on this one thing, it would be so much better. I don't have to deal with that now. And what it's allowed me to do, being in control and making my own mistakes and learning from certain things, it's also given me this ability to listen to other people and trust other people when they give me advice, because I saw when people wouldn't listen to me, what happened and the bad things that would happen and things that wouldn't be successful. So I was like, okay, if I don't know something, I can now build a team of people that, I can bring in someone who knows SEO. I can bring in someone who knows funnels. I can bring in someone who's a copywriter, who is a graphic designer. And I don't have to figure all that stuff out anymore like I did when I started the business. Now I've got the flexibility to go where I want, choose who I want, and grow from there.
Nice. One thing I want to touch on in there is what a lot of entrepreneurs experience is when they become an entrepreneur, it's hard for them to ever become an employee again, right? Because it's a different mindset, and like you said, you like to be in control. And when you go back, if you were to have to go back to corporate, environment, you lose all that control, and it can be a little bit weigh on you a little bit. So
definitely.
I've always heard that entrepreneurs make the worst employees after they've been entrepreneurs.
I can imagine. Yeah, I often think about that. I was like, hey, if I ever sell this business, could I go back and get a job just to have something like that was easy with benefits while I play, with starting a new business? And I'm like, I don't know. The day-to-day, like having to have the same schedule every day, or expectations at a certain speed, or we've worked with some clients that are corporate clients, where the process that those clients have to go through to get things approved, to come up with ideas, to get all legal people to look at something, and then get everyone on the same page. For them, they're used to it, and so it's not frustrating. But for me, it's like, wow, like I've been sitting on this one thing now for 4 weeks, and I have this other client over here that launched their podcast in 4 weeks, and I've been waiting for this one answer. So it can be, it can be frustrating.
Yeah, that is one of the reasons we pivoted. We worked with a lot of brick and mortars, growing the agency, and have since switched to, we still have our brick and mortar business, but now we only market to coaches and consultants, because there's such a more of a speed of, like, nothing has to be run up the ladder, right? You just talk to the primary person and boom, you start to get things implemented. So the speed of growth happens a lot faster.
Gotcha.
In that aspect. So yeah, I love that. So what do you think is the most difficult thing about being an entrepreneur?
For me, it is focus. It is shiny, shiny object syndrome. I've been involved with a mastermind group for 5 or 6 years now, where we're all different marketing types. I'm the podcast person. There's some social media people. There's some web design people. There's some SEO people. There's some copywriters. And every week there's some new thing. There's some new idea. There's something to try. There's someone having success with something. And it's been staying focused on that path of what's the next right thing for my business. I think that has to be the most difficult thing for me.
Wow, nice. So tell us about a client success story that you're proud of.
Oh, sure. Podcasts are just amazing. So we have a lot of them. I can think of one off the top of my head as a client where she's a therapist, and she licensed clinical psychologist, or whatever you want to say. She was only able to see 15 to 20 people a week. And she was helping people, and she wanted to help more people. So we start a podcast, and the podcast allowed her to not only reach more people right away. Instead of 20 people a week, it started out as 50 people an episode, or 150 people an episode. And that allowed her to help more people. It allowed her to take the system that she'd been developing and using with a lot of people, and getting it into people's hands, helping people be much healthier. And now, she had that personality where she was helping people, and then they would tell other people, they would tell their friends, because, who doesn't have issues in a relationship? Who doesn't have issues parenting? Who doesn't have issues with codependency? There are lots of people that maybe they don't have time, they don't have money, they don't have the health insurance that covers it. They're embarrassed about it. They've been told their whole lives, to suck it up and deal with it themselves. They now have a podcast that they can listen to. And so more and more people shared it. And 4 years in now, she's gone from 150 downloads per episode to 150,000 downloads per episode.
Wow, nice.
And helping more and more people, and having workshops and conferences, and certifying people as coaches in her system. I have a lot of stories like that, where people have been able to reach a larger audience, been able to help more people, immigration lawyers that all of a sudden can reach, thousands of people halfway around the world to help them navigate our system as they're coming into our country, and learn what types of visas to use and things like that. That's why I got into podcasting, because I feel like it's the one thing that we have that in our media today that allows us to have long conversations, nuanced conversations, share stories, connect with each other, that type of thing.
Wow, that is super cool. You're helping people have a much larger impact than they probably even thought they could have. It's super cool.
Yes.
So let's dive into your expertise a little bit. Tell us, you kind of touched on a little bit, but we'll go further down this rabbit hole. Why podcasting?
Well, yeah, I mean, like I shared in my story, I was listening to podcasts that were helping me. I was getting information that was helping me in life, helping me start my business, grow my business. And it was the place where, like, I could go to YouTube and watch a 10-minute video. Like, if I want to learn how to fix my sink, I'll go to YouTube. But if I really need to know and I want to learn something, I'm going to a podcast first. And actually, that's what the stats tend to show us. Like when Edison Research does their yearly survey, there's some other, Nielsen has done this, but 75%, 70, 80% of people listen to podcasts to learn something. And for me, that's what it was. That's why I started listening. And then I realized, wow, well, this is a tool that all sorts of people could use. And really, for me, it became a bigger mission of, we're having trouble in our society right now. People have trouble walking an inch in someone else's shoes, let alone a mile. And podcasts give us the place where, like the politics podcast, they can get together and two people who have been friends who disagree on certain things can have conversations and really try to understand, and they can bring in experts who can get them deeper into understanding an issue. What I saw as I went into podcasting is that it allowed people to build relationships with a larger group of people. Because you're having these conversations. I call podcasting referral marketing on a grand scale. Because really, and I'm sure your listeners feel this about you, is that they get you, they like you, they understand who you are, Doug. Doug is now their friend, and they go to Doug every week to hear information and hear new stories and hear advice and experiences and all this sort of stuff. And so if Doug recommends something, they trust you because you're their friend now. And that's why I say it's referral marketing. It really is. And I know that in my business, we're really just now, after 10 years, getting into some of the more hardcore marketing stuff, setting up funnels to grow our email list, really turning our website into something that is focused more on SEO and having a system and an architecture and backlinks and all this stuff that I don't understand, that I hired someone for to set up to really grow our business that way. Up until this point, 10 years of doing it, 30 clients every week, not a lot of turnover, all these launch clients. It's been one of the clients referred me to another client, or I spoke at some place, some conference, and people heard me and said, oh, wow, Danny seems to know what he's talking about. Let me talk to him about starting a podcast. That's what it's been up until now. And that's why I like podcasting. That's why I think it's a good choice for most businesses, is because you can have the time, you can have that long form content to really talk about something and help people.
Love it. So tell us the advantage of hiring someone like you, a consultant, rather than trying and figure it out yourself, doing a podcast.
Yeah. And I actually I'm going to look up the episode number so I can share it. I'm not sure when this one will air, but I'll share the number. No, I did just release it. It came out. Episode 118 of my podcast strategies, is actually called "Should You Do Your Podcast Yourself? Should you DIY your podcast?" And I put that out because, there are some advantages to having a consultant or a company working with a company, and there are some people that can do it themselves. For most people, there are hurdles. Generally, it comes down to time, tech, or too many ideas in terms of hurdles for the DIYer. you get into podcasting and you want to do a 20-minute podcast each week or 20 minutes every other week. And really quickly, once you figure out how to get the right equipment and where you're going to upload your podcast and how you get it out into the world, your 20-minute podcast then takes you an hour and a half, 2 hours to edit if you try to do it yourself because you're obsessing over things. So it can be a problem if you don't have some support, even if you like had a virtual assistant that could help you with editing. Time can get to be a hurdle. It can be a problem. Tech, if you can figure out how to hook up your printer to your computer and get your USB microphone to work and connect to a Zoom call. And when you're connecting to the call and nobody can hear you and you can figure out really quickly, oh, I've got the wrong microphone selected, you might be a person that can figure out the tech of podcasting. You can figure out how to publish your podcast. You can figure out how to schedule your social media posts. You might even be able to figure out how to edit your podcast in Descript or Audacity or something like that. So you might be someone that could DIY. But then there's also people that just have too many ideas and their idea for their podcast is too broad and they need some help focusing. So those are some of the advantages of working with a consultant, is that they, like with our business, we have a team of podcast editors and copywriters and graphic designers, so that literally most of our clients, all they do is record their podcast and then they are done. We handle most of the rest of it. In terms of tech, all they have to figure out how to do is hit record. A lot of our podcasters record their podcast in QuickTime, or they do their interviews in Zoom, or Riverside.fm, something easy. And then they send us a file and they're done. And then in terms of too many ideas, I spend a lot of time with clients at the beginning talking about, well, what's the title of your podcast going to be based on all this data that we collect, and questions that we ask you about how you help people, and what pain points do you solve, and what questions do you get all the time, and what are some keywords that you're already using, like things like that. And we help them plan out their first few episodes so that as new podcast listeners come in and they discover you at episode 25, and then they go back to episode 1, they've got these great first few episodes that really get people indoctrinated in a way into your podcast and really like you right away from the beginning. So that's what we end up doing. And those are a lot of the advantages to working with a consultant versus doing it yourself. Doing it yourself, you're going to save money, but having someone there with you really helps you keep going. One of the biggest problems in podcasting is that people give up. And they don't realize that a podcast is a long-term investment in the marketing world. It's like a YouTube channel. It's like a blog. It's like an email list. It's something that you have to keep doing every week. It's like SEO. I mean, right? You have to keep every few months hitting the right type of pillar content, getting those headings, making sure those keywords are in there, keeping your Google My Business page updated and adding stuff to that, like all that sort of stuff. You keep doing it, because over 6 months, over a year, 2 years, you start to build up this momentum where more and more people are coming into your funnel, more and more people are joining your email list, more and more people are contacting you to hire you, because 8 months ago, they started listening to your podcast. And then they finally got to the point where they were like, oh, we finally need to hire this person because we can't do this ourselves. We need help doing whatever. I have an accounting firm that helps, talks to people about the Profit First system and things like that. And usually about 8 to 10 months in, they join their membership site or go to them and say, hey, I need you to do my taxes this year because I've implemented this system, but I don't know the tax stuff. Those are the advantages we see, is helping people stick with it so they don't experience what we call pod fade in the industry, which is most people don't make it past 10 episodes because they just give up. They don't have enough time. They get frustrated. 10 episodes in, they see there's only 50 people listening and they're like, oh, this is so frustrating. And I say to those people, well, if 50 people showed up at your door every Monday morning to listen to you speak for half an hour, wouldn't that be significant? If you went to a conference and there were 50 people in a session, wouldn't that be significant? You have to realize that I think it's 93% of podcast listeners listen to more than half or all of every episode. So these are people that listen to long form content. We look at our clients' Apple Podcast stats where you can see consumption and things like that. I've got some, like I have a client who's a real estate investor, and he has episodes with 150, 200% consumption, which means that listener has listened to his episode twice because it was either so confusing or so good. I don't know, but like they really wanted to know, and they're spending a lot of time. So that's where we see the advantages to having the help so that you stick with it.
Yeah, and not to mention, there's probably a speed element. Like if you're trying to do it yourself, it's going to take you longer to get to where you want to go, rather than if you hired somebody to help you get there. So,
yeah,
awesome.
Definitely.
So one of the big questions that a lot of people are going to have is, what is the ROI of having a podcast? So can you kind of dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, and that's why like the first thing I ever tell someone who thinks about a podcast is, are you ready to do this for a year? Because if you're not, it's not worth it. Don't, especially with businesses, don't try to do a season. Yeah, it's cool. Like I've had some lawyers do 5 or 6 episodes just so they could talk about something, so that when people go to their site, there's a podcast there and they can listen to a few things, and that helps. The ROI is trust. Really, what it comes down to is that if you stick with it for 6 months, you stick with it for a year, you're building up this group of people that some of them are listening to you more than they talk with their friends. My wife and I try to go out like for an hour and a half date or a couple time or whatever once a week, so that we still have some sort of connection and we know what's going on. There are people that listen to podcasts more than that, and like really have deeper conversations, even though it's one-sided. With a podcast host, they don't have with their partner or their friends or something like that. So that's the ROI, is that over a period of time, you build up this group of people that really trust you, that see you as an authority. Even if you're talking about some TV show and it's a fan podcast, you're an authority to them on that show, that TV show, and they're going to go listen to your podcast right after they watch an episode, because they're going to want to hear what you thought. It's like me listening to sports talk podcasts. I will watch a game on Sunday and can't wait for the episode to come out on Monday, because I want to hear like if the stuff I saw and thought, and I'm like, that was the mistake they made or whatever, is what my trusted podcast host thought, because they've been, watching it more than I have, and they watch the film and all that sort of stuff. So that really is what it is that ROI. Yes, sometimes it's money, sometimes it's leads, sometimes it's monetization, sometimes it's it's someone who 2 years from now said, oh yeah, I've been listening to your podcast for 2 years, and now I want to hire you for this 6-figure contract, things like that. That happens all the time. And I see that in many different ways. But it comes down to that trust.
So other than not having a consultant to help them, what do you see as the biggest challenges or obstacles that a lot of people face when it comes to launching a podcast or just having a podcast in general?
I think, challenges after not having the time, or being able to figure out the tech and things like that. It always comes back to sticking with it. And it comes down to things like, some people will get into podcasting for the wrong reason and get frustrated and leave. Like they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm going to get in and I'm going to have all these sponsors and advertisers approaching me, because I hear there's lots of money in podcasting for advertisers. So those are some of the challenges they face, because they don't realize that, well, you got to have 5,000 downloads per episode after 30 days before an advertiser really even seriously considers you. And oh, by the way, only about the top 5% of all podcasts get that. So it's getting over those frustrations to realize that, oh, wow, I have this tool here where I can talk to my people, my core audience, my loyal audience, for a half an hour, 45 minutes every week. And no other form of media presents that to me. Like I can't I could do a webinar. I could do that. I could, go speak at the Rotary Club to try and do some networking. I could do these things, but this podcast that I have here, these are people that want to listen to me and are looking for this stuff and want to learn. And so if new podcasters can get over that challenge of, why am I doing this? What's the real reason for being here? What are my expectations? What are my goals? Then they'll see a lot more success.
I have a question kind of piggybacking on that. Would you recommend that a beginning podcaster not even look at their stats for X amount of episodes?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you can. It's good to see, like, one of the things we do when we have a launch method that we're going through right now with 6 or 7 clients, and we're setting them up to do things like I'm doing right now, go on other people's podcasts as an expert and talk about something, to borrow audiences. Full disclosure, like, that's why I mentioned episode 118 of my podcast, because I'd love for your listeners to check it out, and hey, if they like me, they can keep listening. So we're gonna have them borrow audiences. We're gonna have them do some social media stuff, but we have them set up a launch team. So we, like, if they have an email list or if they have a social media following, we say, hey, go to this list and tell them about the podcast, and we have an email sequence that we do. But right away, we want to see that, like, those 20 people, 30, 50, 100 people that got on the launch team are listening. So we want to see some of those stats. So it's okay to watch, but I tell people, give it 6 to 8 weeks before you really start to watch. The other thing with podcast stats is that they tend to trickle in and catch up. So your last 2 weeks of stats are not true information anyway. I also tell people, only trust the stats that, like, your media host provides. So most of our clients use Libsyn. Buzzsprout's another good one. There's a bunch out there. But if a service tells you that they can get you any stats other than what those media hosts provide, likely they're getting those stats illegally. So they're tapping into listeners' IP addresses and getting information that they aren't supposed to have, like GDPR and some of the stuff that California has done actually makes it legal. But you can start to see from those stats that, like, okay, let's see, are things changing? Are they improving? Even if they start at like 10 downloads per episode, a month from now, always measure backwards. Are you seeing 20 downloads per episode? Are you seeing an average of 100 downloads per week that 2 months later is up to 150? Don't look at and say, like, oh man, I want to be the daily, the New York Times daily podcast and have 1 million downloads. And if I don't get to 1 million downloads this first year, I'm terrible. You can't do that. You got to measure backwards. You got to think about, who's my audience? Who am I talking to? Is that growing? And so, like, I love seeing our clients have that nice ramp that goes up over time, because that's what you want to see with a podcast. You want to see that people are sharing stuff. You also want to see, like, I tell them to look at their stats to see, how are people listening. We have the things called user agents. Are they listening on Apple? Most likely they are, because 60% of all downloads usually come from Apple's ecosystem. Another 20% of the aggregator apps use Apple's directory. So Apple's the one where you want to give the most attention. You want to make sure. One of the things that's changed in the last few months is that when Apple updated, I think it was iOS 14, where they used to be that they didn't have premium content. So there was a big purple subscribe button. When someone searched for your show, they'd see a big button that said subscribe, and that's what Apple wanted you to click. Well, now Apple has premium content. So if you subscribe, you're paying for something. And so they've changed it to follow, and they moved it to this, like, little check mark up in the top right-hand corner. Now the big purple button says latest episode. So if you're doing it right, you are making sure that your latest episode always has something at the beginning that lets new listeners know what your show is about a little bit. Because now a new person is likely going to listen to your latest episode before they listen to your trailer or before they read your description, because that big button's there. So that
Pro tip alert.
yeah, that's one thing. And I forgot what even the original question was I was talking about, but
Oh, just the obstacles that some people face.
yeah, it's making sure that when you look at your stats, yeah, we're talking about
Oh, we're
stats.
talking about stats. That's what it was.
To look at user agents and look at if it's all Apple and nobody's listening on Spotify or Google Podcasts or something like that, one of the other top 5, that's an opportunity, because Google Podcasts and Spotify are really the only way that Android users have to listen to podcasts. So if you see something like that, you want to look at your stats, because then you could go on social and do a screenshot recording that shows people how to listen on Spotify, something like that. So it is good to look at your stats, but I would say 6 to 8 weeks in, really.
Awesome. Now let's get to the question of, especially for a business, is it best to have a video version and an audio version of your podcast, or does it matter?
It doesn't matter, but what I tell people is, with a podcast, I like starting with a podcast because it's a long form piece of content that you can repurpose. So our clients, we recommend that they even broadcast their recording live. While you and I are recording here on Zoom, we could be using StreamYard or Facebook Live or YouTube Live, or I have LinkedIn Live to broadcast while we're recording. So we get a few people there, but we also record video at the same time. And then if we wanted to put some clips on YouTube, we could do clips of the interview on the YouTube channel. We could also then take the audio and that gets edited into the podcast. And then, like with our clients, we're doing that, and then we're transcribing it. And a copywriter is writing a blog post or two from that. In addition to, we're creating the show notes, and then we're sending out an email, and then we're posting something on the website, and then we're taking quotes from the transcript and doing social media posts that we schedule out and things like that. So that's why I say, if you're going to do a podcast, just do all those things, because then you've got stuff that you can use. However, in your question, I don't want to confuse people. In terms of a podcast that you actually publish as a podcast, there really is no reason to do a video podcast anymore. It's maybe like 5%, 5 to 10% of all podcasts have a video version that people listen to through Apple Podcasts or through Spotify. You can consume video podcasts through those apps, but hardly anyone does it, because most people don't watch videos that long. They go to YouTube and they'll watch a 10-minute video, but they'll only watch like 3 minutes of it, or they'll watch it at 2x. So if you're going to do a podcast, really just focus on the audio version for your podcast feed.
Okay, awesome. So I've been to your website and I noticed several products and programs that you have available. Can you tell us about those?
Oh yeah, and I have a bunch of stuff. So for if you're someone who's an online business, or you're someone who's a brick and mortar who's wanting to scale, wanting to grow their online business, or even if you're a brick and mortar and you want to do a really geolocation specific podcast, like we have several lawyers who do very location specific podcasts where they are like the digital mayor of their town, as a way to just generate awareness of them as the personal injury attorney that is not on all the billboards. I'm the one who actually will tell you about your area and who's lived here, and I'll make sure this is an interesting podcast. So you can do all those things. And if you, going back to that question of, what are the hurdles, what advantage is it to having help? If you know you're going to need help, if you want someone to guide you through that process, we have launch packages where we help people soup to nuts, done for you. And if you're someone like, I have a client right now who's a wellness blogger who happens to be a graphic designer, we do sort of a done with you, where we handle the parts that she couldn't figure out, and she designed, she added the page to her website and designed her podcast artwork, that type of thing. But generally in those launch packages, we do all those steps. We help you at the beginning think about the brand conversation. What is this podcast? Who are we talking to? How does that affect the branding? What is the data that we have? What's the strategy that we're going to use in this podcast? What are you going to talk about? Going to planning the content and creating all the design elements around it, producing the podcast, showing you how to record, getting the equipment, and then doing all the back end stuff, the publishing, the distribution, and the launch in itself. And then generally we have those clients join us, and we manage their podcast on a monthly basis. So we also have production packages where we go that way. If you're someone who doesn't have the budget for that, because that's the type of thing where it's a 3, 4, 5 figure proposition, depending upon what you are involved in. I also have a membership site, which is called the Podcaster Pod, where if you join it, DannyOzment.com/pod, we can put all these links in the show notes. If you join it, you get access to a 10 module podcasting 101 course that goes through all the stuff that I would do for you, but shows you how to do it on your own, teaches you how to use the software, how to record things, how to set stuff up, how to fill in every blank when you're setting up your media hosting account, that type of stuff. And then we also have a community in the Podcaster Pod where it's a Slack channel. Right now we got 50 podcasters in there who are people. It's like a giant mastermind where other podcasters can ask me questions, but they can also talk to each other. And they can figure out like what's working for people. A hot topic recently has been getting booked on other podcasts and then private podcast feeds, like how to do exclusive content for your podcast audience that people might want to pay for. So we do that, and we have monthly Q&A calls, quarterly expert calls where I've had someone in there last month that was talking about podcast PR, and then we've got someone coming up in February that's going to talk about digital products and funnels and things like that. But that's the Podcaster Pod. That's for the people that are the do-it-yourselfers. If you aren't a do-it-yourselfer and you're going to need help, that's where we help you at Emerald City Productions.
So let me kind of backtrack. So you also work one-on-one. That's like the launch packages are like one-on-one and the
yes.
Okay. So do you have like a course too, or is it just I think you might have just explained it all. You have everything that you have. So you have one-on-one.
If you want one-on-one, if you want done for you, that's our launch packages at emeraldcitypro.com. If you want to do it yourself, if you want a course that teaches you how, and then you want a community that's going to support you, that's the membership site at DannyOzment.com/pod.
All right. Well, we're going to put all those links below, including the link to episode 118, I believe you mentioned below, so that people can check that out. It has been great having you on the show today, Danny. Any last words for our audience?
No, I would encourage everyone, if they've ever thought about a podcast, if they think it would be fun, don't hesitate. Start ugly, just get going. Because with a podcast, there's too many people that I have met that, I've been thinking about a podcast for a year and I just haven't gotten started yet. And I say to them, well, if you'd just gotten started, you'd be hitting that stride right now where people were starting to talk to you and you'd be seeing leads and things like that. You just got to get started, get it out there so that people can start building that relationship with you.
Yeah, I can second exactly what you just said because it's from personal experience. So awesome. Thank you again and have a wonderful day.
Great. Thank you.